In this problem, we're given a story and an equation, and we're asked to find the practical domain and range. You may have come across domain and range in your class already. The domain is basically the set of all possible inputs, and the range are the kind of things you'd get out of the function, the collection of all possible outputs. The practical domain and range, however, is a little bit different than this. In a story, sometimes it's just not practical to put in certain numbers, so we restrict the domain a little bit more. So for example, if you were to graph this equation, you might notice that this is the equation of a line. You could think of this in the form of y equals mx plus b, where there is no b, so it would be 0, and your m, the slope of the line, would be 3.63. So imagine graphing a line with a slope of 3.63. It would go to the left forever, to the right forever, down forever, and up forever. So if I just asked for the domain and range, you'd say that both are all real numbers. You can plug in anything you want, and you can get out any number that you'd want. But in the context of the story, there's many numbers that doesn't make any sense. So for example, if you just read the story and look at what they're defining the input and the output to be, they're saying that the input here in parentheses, G, represents the gallons of gasoline that you're buying. The output, C of G, represents the cost in dollars for putting that much gasoline, or excuse me, propane, in the motorhome. So down here, we're just going to start by telling what the practical domain is. And notice they put the letter G here because domain always concerns itself with what are the possible inputs to the equation, or in this case, because we're doing practical domain, what makes sense to plug into the equation. So if you read the entire story, it says that the propane tank can hold a maximum of 20 gallons. So this gives me an idea what the smallest and largest inputs would be in the story. Since G is the amount of gas that I can put in the motorhome's tank, it makes sense to me that the smallest amount of gas that I could put in would be 0. Just don't put any in at all. So I want my G value to be bigger than or equal to 0. So I'm going to put a 0 here. So 0 is less than or equal to G, which means G is bigger than or equal to 0. The biggest amount that I could put in, or the largest amount of gas that I could put in, is right here. It says 20 gallons is the maximum I could hold, so I'm going to put 20 there. Now the range is going to be slightly more complicated to calculate, but not much. The range concerns itself with what kind of outputs could we get. So in this case, since my output represents cost, what kind of costs could we incur by putting in between 0 and 20 gallons of propane in the tank? So let me start with my smallest value. If I was to put in 0 gallons of gasoline, it makes sense that there'd be $0 of cost. You could see this as well mathematically if you were to plug 0 in for G. It would say that C of 0 equals 3.63 times 0, and any number times 0 would be 0. So this makes sense that the minimum cost here would be $0. The largest cost is slightly harder to calculate. At least I can't do it in my head. You would have $3.63 a gallon, and we're plugging in 20 gallons of gasoline. So if I was to take 3.63 and plug in 20, you could do this on your calculator, or I guess you could do it in your head by, instead of multiplying by 20, I guess you could multiply by 10 and then by 2. So if you did that, if you put in 3.63 times 20, you get that if you put in 20 gallons of propane in your tank, the cost would be 3.63 times 20 is 72.6. So I'm going to put in 72.6. If you're following along, you know that that means $72.60. So just to make it pretty, I'm going to put the 0 there. But that's basically how you find the practical domain